Shalom Aleichem. Today is Yom Hamishi B'Shabbat, Thursday, Yod Gimel V'Av Tal Shin Peh, according to our calendar, corresponding to the 7th of August, 2025, according to the Gregorian calendar. In our last shiur, we completed Perek Shemini, Perek Heth, the 8th chapter of Hilchot Teshuvah and the Rambam, where Rambam discussed things to do with Olam Haba and Rambam's understanding. We discussed Rambam's understanding of these concepts. I want to begin today's shiur by quoting from this book over here, Rav Sa'adia Gaon, Hanivhar Be'emunoth U'Bede'oth, or often known simply as Emunoth U'Bede'oth Rabbeinu Sa'adia Gaon, who also, of course, discusses these matters. And I just want to quote a few statements made by Rav Sa'adia Gaon in order to point out that Rambam's position is certainly not the only position and the only possible understanding of these matters. In fact, Rambam's position, to be honest, is quite, one could even say extreme, or at least one could definitely say unique, in that Rambam understands Olam Haba to be that which follows death, number one, when a person leaves this world. And second of all, Rambam understands Olam Haba, as we saw last week, and the previous week, I think. Rambam understands Olam Haba to be a reality in which there is no physical existence, there is no body, that is to say. There is only the nefesh or the neshama, using the various terms, but no body. And this, in fact, is an unusual position, and it was rejected. It was not understood in this manner by almost any Chacham, I think it would be fair to say, perhaps none before Rambam, and after Rambam, perhaps some did accept this idea, but certainly, by all means, not all. I would say most did not accept this idea. One of the things that Rav Sa'adia discusses here, and this will also touch upon various things that we shall see in this upcoming Perek Tishei of Hilchot Teshuvah in Rambam. Let me quote from a few statements here of Rabbeinu Sa'adia Gaon. I should also mention that, as we have discussed and noted on a number of occasions, Rambam not infrequently learns from and accepts the positions and the explanations and the overall hashkafa, shall we say, of Rav Sa'adia Gaon on many issues. But as we see, not always. Rambam reserved for himself the right, and quite rightly so, to conclude otherwise. But Rambam was most definitely very familiar with this book that I'm looking at now. No question. There are a number of places in this sefer. This edition is the most accurate edition. You can see here two columns, opposing columns. One is the original Arabic, based on the best manuscripts available, and the right-hand column is the Hebrew translation by Mori Hagaon Rav Yosef Rabbi David Bar-Hayim Zecher Tzadik Livracha. And there are many footnotes. Rav Bar-Hayim wrote many footnotes as he went through the sefer, and he frequently points out in these footnotes that certain statements of Rav Sa'adia in this sefer, in Hanifhar by Emunoth U'Bede'oth, we find later in Rambam. So there's no question Rambam was familiar with this Sefer, very much so. I don't think there was any doubt about that to begin with, but it's very obvious when you examine, when you look into these things more thoroughly, that you see the clear influence that Rav Saadia had on Rambam on many issues. But occasionally Rambam thought that a different approach or a different conclusion was called for.
Last week you discussed how at least one can partially explain Rambam's position on Olam Haba by noting that he was influenced by Greek philosophy in many ways.
Yes, that is
can
true.
a similar thing be said of Rav Saadia Gaon, that his worldview or his hashkafa was somehow influenced by other philosophies and other ideas?
It can be said, and it must be said, at least occasionally. But it is also a fact that if you compare the positions on certain matters, such as this question of Olam Haba, of Rav Saadia and Rambam, then it is fair to say that Rambam was more influenced, or more completely, not 100%, but more consistently fell in line with certain assumptions and positions that were common in medieval times, as a result of the widespread dissemination of Greek philosophy in Arabic translation. It should be noted. There is no indication, to my knowledge, that Rabbeinu Saadia knew ancient Greek, and the same is true, and in fact definitely true with regards to Rambam. That's fine, that's okay. But they were most definitely influenced by certain things that were going on in their time, had been going on for some time, in fact a number of centuries. It is further correct to point out that many of these assumptions and notions fell into disrepute, shall we say. First of all, in the Islamic world, where Rav Saadia and Rambam grew up and found themselves throughout their lives. The Muslim world at some point reached the conclusion that too much thinking is a bad thing, and basically all this philosophical, particularly Aristotelian mode of thought is inimical to Islam. In some ways it is. It has to be stated. It's not a completely spurious conclusion. And the same is true with regards to the Jewish world as well. In other words, you can find many Chachamim in the period in these medieval times. Rav Saadia is one example, but there are other much more extreme examples. Rambam is a more extreme example, as we said, and we could mention someone like Rabbi Yosef Kaspi, and you could mention someone like Ralbag, Rabbi Levi ben Gerashom, and one could mention many others. One could mention Rabbi Histai ben Kirkas or Kraskas, I can't remember how that last name should be pronounced, and many other Chachamim who adopted various positions, and it's more even a question of assumptions, basic assumptions, that colored all of their thinking, basically. This does not mean to say that the Perushim of Rabbi Yosef Kaspi or the Ralbag on Tanakh, in which you find many of these ideas, are of no value. That's entirely not true. That's not what I'm saying. The Ralbag has many very insightful Perushim throughout the Tanakh. His Perush is very important, but it is true that it also is quite distinctly flavored with these kinds of ideas and assumptions, which, frankly, many people today find even amusing, and certainly not compelling, as they were considered by many educated people to be in earlier times. In other words, any educated person in the time of Rav Saadia or certainly in the time of Rambam in the Islamic world, including the Jews who lived under that Arab hegemony, which for that reason, by the way, many of these Chachamim, and including Rambam, felt that the fourth Malchut referred to in Daniel, in Sefer Daniel, is the Muslim Empire, and not the Roman Empire. That's an interesting discussion in itself. But there is such an opinion, because the Muslim Empire was extremely powerful, and its influence was spread over a huge swath of the globe. In general, people are unaware of the true history of Islamic conquest. Most people don't understand the simple basic fact that Islam is first and foremost a political manifesto for conquest, and the religious aspect is the bond that unites all the various Islamic forces that wished to in the past and continue to wish and intend to do so in the present and in the future, to conquer the entire world. If you just listen to them and read what they write, they will tell you this explicitly. They don't hide it. For some reason, some people don't get it. The fact is that Arabs used to live exclusively in a place called Arabia and a few surrounding areas, what we call today, what is referred to today as Jordan, which is all mostly desert, and certain other areas. But they did not live in or control any areas beyond that, really, before the Islamic conquest. And so who did live in the Middle East, shall we say, apart from Arabia? Well, in all the other parts of the Middle East, you had Jews, and you had Christians, many Christians, non-Arab Christians. In the fullness of time, there were also some Arabs who had adopted Christianity, and there were many other peoples, the remnants of the various, the remnants of the Phoenicians and the remnants of the Assyrians and the etc. To this day, you have people who refer to themselves as Ashurim, and others who refer to themselves as Aramim, and their native tongue is a dialect of Aramaic. And some of them still survive, those who were not massacred by ISIS, etc. years ago. But there is nothing new about what ISIS did whenever it was. I don't recall the exact years now, but let's say back 10, 15 years ago, because that has been the history of Islam. They spread out and conquered huge areas. They successfully broke out of Arabia, conquered huge areas, all the way to Spain eventually in the year 711 or 12, according to the Gregorian calendar. And in fact, many people don't know they even conquered a large part of France. And it was in France that the Muslim conquest was actually stopped, and that they were forced to eventually retreat. And that led eventually to the Reconquista, in the reconquering of Spain by Christians from the Muslims, eventually, hundreds of years later. About 8 centuries later, almost 7.5 centuries later. The point is that wherever the Arab Muslims went, they forcibly converted huge numbers of people to Islam, so that many of the, not all, but many of the Christians, for example, who had been a majority of the people in the Middle East before, disappeared. That some were killed, and some were forcibly converted. This is also Jews. This happened to many Jews as well. We know for a fact, and there are such people who are known as Arabs here in Eretz Yisrael today, who some of them will admit freely that they are actually Jews that were forcibly converted to Islam, whether it was 200 years ago or 300 years ago. We know about such things 200 and 300 and 500 years ago, but we also know about such things going back 1400 and 1300 and 1200 years. We know about this explicitly. There were Arabs in Har Hebron, in other words, the areas around Hebron, south of Hebron, who went in after the Milchemet Sheshet Hayamim, the 6-Day War. They met up with some soldiers and with some archaeologists who began to wander around and see what might be discovered in these new areas, so to speak. Not very new, but places they were they did not have access to. And they showed up literally with menorot, with hanukiot in their hands, saying this is an heirloom from our forefathers, and we know that we are Jews. Almost none of them had expressed any real desire to re-embrace Judaism. There have been a handful of individual such cases, but to this day, in the very large Arab city, actually, of Yalta, in the south of Hebron, there is an entire tribe. In other words, the city is divided into hamulot, or tribes, and there's an entire tribe that they're referred to by themselves and by the rest of the city as Al-Yahud, because they're all former Jews that were forcibly converted to Islam. And this was the pattern throughout the Middle East and North Africa. In Egypt, we know, for example, the original Egyptians are not the majority population in Egypt today. The original Egyptians are the Copts, who are Christians. And they today are a small, persecuted minority within Egypt. And the same is true throughout North Africa. In most of North African countries like Tunisia, Morocco, etc., Libya, the original inhabitants remain. They're still the majority, but they were forcibly converted to Islam, as also happened, by the way, in many parts of Spain, for example. That is the true history. It's not the history that you find in many of the history books, but it is the true history. There is an historian by the name of Raymond Ibrahim. He was born in Egypt, his family originally are Copts, originally from Egypt, but they emigrated to the United States before he was born. He was born in the United States. And he has a number of books on these subjects. And he is at pains to bring to people's attention these basic facts of history. In other words, there is something more dangerous than fake news, and that is fake history. Fake news is ephemeral because most people don't remember yesterday's news or last week's news, fake or not. But fake history receives a kind of aura and formality and seriousness and gravitas that people find difficult to shake off. So they've been told so many times that there was a golden period for centuries when Christians and Jews and Arabs lived together in a golden age, etc. This is entirely spurious. There was never such a time, essentially. And the Arab conquest was always, and is wherever it exists, brutal and barbaric. And that's the reality. And that has been the reality, and the sources are there. It's not difficult to prove if you just look up the sources, as someone like this historian does. And It's all there, all the facts are there. Not so difficult to discover, but it's all politicized, of course, today. Very much so, especially when the people who pay the bills of various universities are to be found in Qatar or other such bastions of free speech and intellectual freedom. So it all depends who pays the bill, or as Hazal say, Ba'al ha-mi'ah, Ba'al ha-di'ah. And that's the reality, and it has always been so. To return to Rabbeinu Sa'adia Gaon. I'm not going to read the entire chapter to you, obviously. This is the Ma'amar HaTish'i, the 9th chapter of this, which is divided into 10 chapters, this Sefer of Rav Sa'adia. And so Rav Sa'adia, for example, here on page Resh Samech Tet in this book, which is in chapter Ma'amar HaTish'i, the 4th section, he writes as follows. He quotes Chazal, Masaru kadmoneno zichronu livracha, mipia nevi'im. Chazal state in the name of the Nevi'im, Ki mashul ha'olam hazeh legabe ha'olam haba kefroz dod. That is how he writes it, with a darat at the end, not a prosdor, but a prosdod. This is how it appears in all the ancient sources. Rambam also is gores prosdod. In other words, Olam Hazeh is like the corridor or the foyer that leads into the main large hall. So a person has to prepare himself in this world for the next world. And he quotes the statement in the Mishneh, Hathken asmach befroz adod kedeh she'tikanes latraklin. He continues and he says, there is only one way to cleanse one's soul from the various stains and what he refers to here as kehuth v'shaharuth, darkness that attaches to the soul in this world easily because of multiple influences and possibilities for being dragged down by various aspects of this world. The only way to achieve release from all of that is Teshuvah, right? He writes here. And he quotes Chazal, Yofeh sha'a hat b'teshuvah u'ma'asim tovim ba'olam hazeh mehayeh ha'olam haba. In other words, 1 hour of Teshuvah in this world is worth all of Olam Haba, because that is the great key. And he quotes the other statement that Rambam also quoted last week, as in Perek Hayth of Hilchot Teshuvah that we saw last week. Olam Haba en bolo achila bolo shetiyah. In the world to come, there is no drinking or eating. Bolo masa umathan, bolo pirya or riviyah. There is no procreation, there is no commerce. Ela sadiqim yoshavim matorothehem beroshehem une'anim yiziwa shechina. So the statement of Chazal is universally accepted. That's not the question. The question is what you make of all of these things, because these things are obviously not at all simple to grasp. And Rav Sa'adia continues to say, the Chachamim masaru lanu shekol mi she'eno ma'amin b'gmul ha'olam haba, he who does not believe in Olam Haba, u'matan Torah u'amitut ha'masoret, en lo helek ha'olam haba, he will have no part in that world. Wa'af al pi shekol ma'asav b'tzedek, even though he hasn't committed any avera. In other words, his lack of acceptance of this tenet is itself will prevent him from being existing in that place in that time. And then he goes on to say in section Hey 5 on page Resh Ain Aleph, he says, "Wahar shekvar be'arti yesodot elu hakartim omar ata." This is all Arab style, Islamic style way of composition of such a text. In that respect, Rav Sadia is very much influenced by the literature of his day. Kima shehagemul ha'onesh al haguf v'hanefesh yahad kihem po'al echad. Here you begin to hear a very different position. He says, Rav Sadia says, hagemul ha'onesh, both the reward and the punishment, apply to the body and to the soul. Al haguf v'hanefesh yahad kihem po'al echad, because they are one unit. They go together. There is no such thing as a guf by itself. There's no such thing as a nefesh by itself. And then he goes on to say that both the gemul and the onesh, the reward and the punishment, are, as he writes here, or as Rav Gafe translates, shnei inyanim adinim. He means to say by that ruhanim, in other words, non-physical, non-corporeal, materialistic realities, but spiritual realities, which Hashem will create in the future. This is again not like Rambam. Yivraem Hashem Yithromem Yithader Bazman Shilum. When the time comes, when the time for Olam Haba comes around, then these realities of Gemul and Onesh will be created by Hashem. As always, Rav Sadia quotes many Pesukim and interprets them as he understands them to support his claims and his understandings. He goes on to say, Yisod hadavar hazeh, yihadashehu habore yitromem yitader b'domeh l'shemesh. Hashem will create this reality of Olam Haba as Hashem created the sun. What does he mean by this? Lefi she'ashemesh homa v'ora meshutafim einam nifradim zeh mizeh. In other words, he means to say that the same in the same way that the sun can be a healthy thing or a harmful, it can be harmful to a human being if a person lies in the sun for too long in a place where the sun's rays are powerful, then that is unhealthy. But the same sun can be very, very healthy for another person in a different place when exposed to that sun for a reasonable period of time. And he goes on to say, Im Yivakesh, so he says, the body at that time, he says, having already stated that Olam Haba is a place where the body exists, in a different dimension, but there is a corporeal body. He says, there will be no need for sustenance, for food, as it was, he says, with Moshe Rabbeinu, who went 40 days and 40 nights without food or drink. In other words, there is a reality. We already see it in this world. There can be a reality, which in this world is a miraculous, supernatural, and exceptional reality. But there is a possibility of a physical body existing without physical material sustenance in the normal way, but somehow sustained by Hashem in a miraculous way. Olam Haba will be a different place and dimension in which that will be the norm and not the exception. And this new reality will be created in the future, does not exist at the present time, which is again not what Rambam wrote, as we saw. And Rav Sadia connects this to the pasuk, Ki ka'asher hashamayim hadoshim v'haaretz hadasher asher ani oseh, the new world that I will create. So that is understood by Rav Sadia to refer to that. And then he goes on to say further, and when will this take place? Bizman ha-yeshu'a lu'umatho. In other words, first there is a geula, Yeshua, in this world. for Am Yisrael. And from that reality of Yeshua in this world, mitoch, based on, and from that reality will spring forth the new reality of Olam Haba. These are some of the things that Rav Saadia Gaon writes on this subject, which are clearly quite different from Rambam's position. And most of the sources that one can look up, such as Torah Ha'adam of Rambam, where he discusses these things, and many others, you will find are either exactly identical to or similar to and the Rav Saadia's position, and not that of Rambam. All right, so having mentioned those things, let us now continue with Rambam. Hilchot Teshuvah, Perek Tishi. Rambam says as follows: מאחר שנודע שמתן שכרן של המצוות והטובה שנזכה לה, אם שמענו דרך השם הכתוב בתורה היה עולם הבא. Seeing that we know that the reward and the very desirable and beneficial, positive reality that we shall receive and inherit if we follow the ways of Hashem and the Torah, that is called Olam Haba. Shene'emar lema'an itav lach v'harachta yomim v'hanekama shenokamim min harasha'im she'ozavu orchot hasadek hakutuvot b'Torah, and the punishment, the compensation, the negative compensation, that those who turn their back on the righteous ways of the Torah, hiya kareth, that is referred to as kareth, which means that one will not be zoche, one will not be in that reality of Olam Haba. Shene'emar hi kareth tikareth hanefesh hi awonah ba. This was also mentioned in the previous perek. If that, seeing that this is the case, mahu zeh shekatuv b'chol haTorah kula, im tishma'u yagia lachem, ve'im lo tishma'u yikra etchem. V'chol otham ha'devarim b'olam hazeh. What are we to make, therefore, of all the various statements in the Torah, where it states repeatedly that if you do such and such, then good things, positive things will ensue. And if you do the opposite, negative things will ensue. And all those promises and all those threats apply to Olam Hazeh, to this world. In other words, whether you'll have rainfall in its right time or there will be drought, whether there will be pestilence or health, etc. All these things refer to Olam Hazeh, Kiron, Sova, Ra'av. In other words, having sufficiency of food or famine, or milchama or shalom, peace and war, umalchuth or shifluth, whether the Jewish people will be a sovereign, independent nation. That's referred to here as malchuth, when they have a malchuth, when they have their own sovereign nation and government. Or shifluth, or the opposite, where they are downtrodden and subjugated and ruled over by others. Yeshivat ha'aretz v'galuth, or being in Eretz Yisrael, which is the normative, healthy, positive state of affairs. V'galuth, the opposite is exile, living in the galuth. V'haslahat ma'aseh v'hefsedo, and being successful in general in what we turn our attention to, or not being successful. Usha'ar kol divrei haberith. Halacha Gimel. Kol otam ha'devarim emet hayu. All these things were true, vihiyu, and will be true. Ubezman she'anu osim kol mitzvot haTorah. When we follow the mitzvot of the Torah, yagiu elenu tovot ha'olam hazeh kulan. All the positive things mentioned in the Torah will be our lot. ובזמן שאנו עוברים עליהן, when we transgress all these things, תקרא אותנו הרעות הכתובות, all the negative, evil, undesirable things will be our lot in this world. ואף על פי כן, and nevertheless, אין אותן הטובות, הן סוף מתן שכרן של המצוות. But that is not to say that this is the last word when it comes to reward for following in the path of the Torah and listening and accepting Hashem's word and instruction. ולא אותם הרעות הן סוף הנקמה שנוקמים מעובר על כל המצוות, nor is that those punishments which apply and exist in this world, they're not the final punishment either. אלא כך הוא Hesa hadavarim. Hesa is also, it could also be written with a thoti, Hesa or Hesa hadavarim, which means this is, I will now present the matter to you as it should be understood. The Hasia is to lay out something. HaKodesh Baruch Hu notan lanu Torah zo Eitz Hayim. Hashem gave us this Torah, which is referred to in the Pasuk as Eitz Hayim, a tree of life, which is of course also a reference to what we find at the beginning of Sefer Bereshit. Eitz Hayim tov v'ra, v'chol ha'oseh kol ha'katuv ba. And he who follows all of the Torah, v'yoda'o de'a gemura nechona, and understands it, or internalizes it in a deep and significant way, not in a simplistic or childish way. Moria Rav Gafech goes to great lengths, both here and many other places, when Rambam uses this kind of terminology. Yoda'o, it does not mean, Rav Gafech always points out, to believe, in the same way that I may say about all manner of things that I believe such and such, but you do not truly know it or fathom it. It's not something that you have come to grips with intellectually and spiritually. It's just some shallow statement, I believe such and such, but that's not knowing, that's not true knowledge, that's not something that becomes part of you. So yoda'o de'a gemura nechona means to have fully formed and internalized a given opinion based on the Torah. That a person who does this, zoche bal ha'olam haba, such a person achieves his place in olam haba, a place in olam haba. And the portion that one receives in olam haba depends on the depth of one's understanding. Ulefi godel ma'asav v'godel chokhmato hu zoche, according to his actions, how great and correct and proper they are or were, and his understanding and wisdom, hu zoche. This, by the way, is a very, very much a Greek philosophical construct, that a person's place in Olam Haba is determined by his intellectual and spiritual capacities. And therefore it follows that there are many different levels in Olam Haba, and he whose understanding was and wisdom was of a much lower order will also be on a much lower rung, shall we say, ba'olam haba. And here too, many Chachamim have disagreed with this formulation of Rambam. V'hiftihanu b'Torah, and the Torah, Hashem promised us in the Torah, she'im na'aseh otha b'simha u'tovat nefesh, if we follow the Torah, live according to the Torah, b'simha, joyfully, happily, not all the while complaining or grumbling. U'tovat nefesh, in other words, with a positive and proper attitude. وَنَهَجَّبَ حُكْمَ تَمِيدًا, and we dwell on the wisdom of the Torah, that which we glean from the Torah always. We make this our main concern. שיסיר ממנו כל הדברים המונעים אותנו מלעשותה, that Hashem will remove from our path all those things that could prevent us from studying and living the Torah. כגון, such as holy, disease, ומלחמה, war, ורעב, famine, וכיוצא בהן. In such situations, a person cannot really live and study and progress and advance in intellectual and spiritual terms. וישפיע לנו כל הטובות המחזקים את ידינו לעשות את התורה, and Hashem will, our reward will be in this world that Hashem will create the conditions such that we are able to study and live according to the Torah in peace and as Rambam said, b'simcha v'tovat nefesh. Kiron, such as sova, in other words, plenty in the material sense, v'shalom, peace, uruvot kesef v'zahav, and financial, economic success. Uruvot kesef v'zahav, in other words, literally much gold and silver. כדי שלא נעסוק כל יומנו בדברים שהגוף צריך להם, so that we will not be required to spend all our time pursuing those things which we need for our physical material existence. אלא נשב פנויים ללמוד בחוכמה, rather that we will have time to study the Torah, the Chokhmah that we are able to discover through the Torah, ולעשות המצווה, and to do the Torah, that which we are commanded to do. כדי שנזכה לחיי עולם הבא, that is exactly the reward in this world, that the conditions will exist for you to be able to do and live in this fashion. That is the greatest reward that one can hope for in this world. וכן הוא אומר בתורה, so it states in the Torah, אחר שהבטיח בטובות העולם הזה. It says in Devarim, if we look at, this is in Devarim Perek Shishi, Perek Wal, at the end of the Perek, it says, وَيَسَوَنُ Adonai, Hashem commanded us, this is Moshe Rabbeinu speaking, لَعَصَوْتَ كَلَ حُقِّمْ هَائِلَ, that we should follow all this instruction, لِيِرْآ at Adonai Elohenu, to fear Hashem, our God, لَتَوْ لَنُ كَلْ هَيَمِيمْ, so that it will be well with us, Kol Hayamim, which can clearly be understood to refer to as Olam Hazeh or Olam Haba, L'Hayotenu Kayom Hazeh, and to sustain us as it is this day. Uthdaqati Elanu, and this will be the most positive thing that we can hope for, because in that situation, Ki nishmor la'asot kol ha'mitzvah zot lifnei Adonai Elohenu kasher tzivanu, we will be able to we will be able to live in this world and follow the Torah and live in communion with Hashem and improve ourselves and gain insight and understanding, etc., by way of fearing Hashem. Now there is, of course, the question whether I know how to return to the former place. Just a moment. Okay. One moment. Very well. Halacha Hey. So Perek Tet in Hilchot Teshuvah, Halacha Hey, in this edition. V'chen hodi'anu b'Torah. And similarly, Hashem informs us in the Torah, she'im na'azov Torah, mida'atenu. If we choose to turn our backs on the Torah, v'na'asok b'havleh hazaman, and busy ourselves with empty, frivolous pursuits and ideas and discussions and beliefs, including spending all of our time making money, building businesses, etc. These are positive things, but if they become, if they encroach on that which we should strive for in this world, then they themselves become a negative reality and impact us in a very detrimental manner. So, imna azavat haTorah mida'atenu v'na'asok b'havleh hazaman kinyan shene'emar, as it says, v'yishman yishurut v'yiv'at, that Am Yisrael will, as Moshe Rabbeinu predicts, will become fat and literally kick, that is to say, become rebellious and undisciplined, and will refuse to conform with Hashem's wish and instruction. Then, Shedayan ha'emet yasir min ha'uzavim kol tovot ha'olam hazeh. Then the righteous judge, that is to say Hashem, who is the true and precise judge of all things, he will remove all those positive things that we can achieve in this world, such as peace and plenty and peace of mind and stability, which will allow us to live our lives in this Torah, in this world, in the most positive and correct fashion, as we described. Shehen hizaku yadahem liv'ot. All those things, which also those things that led people astray. We know that it is usually the case that too much material success in this world leads people astray. That is usually the case. And it leads to what we call decadence, and as we see time and again, this leads to the fall of empires, and everything collapses. Everything deteriorates, and everything becomes everything is corrupted. So all those things which can be for the good, but can also be for the bad, all those positive things, all that plenty and that material success in this world will all be removed. And he will bring upon those who turn their back on his Torah, all those things which will not allow them to gain Olam Haba by what they do here, or are able to do here in this world, Olam Hazeh, so that they shall literally be destroyed by their own evil. In other words, human beings are generally the authors of their own destruction. This too we see. Hu shekathuv b'Torah v'avarta et oyevecha asher yishalachenu Adonai bach. And you shall find yourselves being subjugated and working for your enemies that Hashem will send against you. Tahat asher lo avarta et Adonai. Seeing that you refused to worship Hashem and to live according to Hashem's instruction and direction. Zayin. No, sorry. Wow, halacha wow. Nimsa perush korotana berachot v'hakhilalot al derech zo. And thus you are to understand all of the various promises and threats in the Torah, the positive and the negative, in the following manner. Kolomar, im abadtem et Hashem b'simcha, if you chose to follow Hashem and serve Him in this world, and therefore also benefit yourself. Ushmaltem darko, and you keep his follow in that path and live up to that berith, that covenant. Mashpi'a lechem haberachot ha'elu umarhik ha'kalalot. Hashem will bring upon us He will bring upon them, those who follow Hashem, the barachot, the positive, and will keep them far away from all those negative things. Ad shetihiyu penuyim nithakem b'Torah v'l'asok ba. So that, ad does not mean until, it means so that. This is also an Arabic construction. Ad shetihiyu penuyim nithakem b'Torah v'l'asok ba. So that you will find yourselves able in such a position to focus on the Torah and its teachings and its wisdom. And by so doing in this world, you will also achieve Olam Haba, the next world. And thus you will be zocheh to Olam Haba, which is referred to as Olam Shekulo Tov, a world which is pure goodness and gain and profit, with Ta'arich Yamim L'Olam Shekul Aruch, and this will be your lot for all time. V'nimsetem zochim l'shnei ha'olamot, and thus you will be zocheh to both worlds. You will exist in both of these dimensions. L'hayim tovim ba'olam hazeh, ha'mevi'im l'hayeh ha'olam haba. You will live a pleasant, positive, healthy, wholesome, and productive existence in this world, which enable one to achieve Olam Haba. She'im lo yikne hena chokhmah u'ma'asim tovim. If a person does not do this here in this world, en lo b'ma yizkeh. How else is he supposed to do it? What else? Where else can you achieve those things? That spiritual, intellectual level, in order to be zocheh, to merit Olam Haba, if not here. Shene'emar ki en ma'aseh v'heshbon v'da'at v'chokhmah v'sho'ol. As it says in Kohelet, there is no more. Sha'ol, in other words, the grave, there is no time and no place for becoming wise and knowledgeable and improving one's lot. And if you turn your back on Hashem and allow yourself to sink into the excessive, unbridled materialism of this world, in other words, you concentrate, you focus your thoughts and your actions and your aspirations, food and drink, uznuth, and promiscuity, and the like, you will receive all the kalalot that you find in the Torah, all the curses, and all the positive things, the barachot, will not be your lot. And it will be beyond your power. You may want certain things, but you won't be able to achieve them. And you will spend your days in this world in fear and a state of constant anguish and uncertainty. You will not have the peace of mind, v'lo guf shalem, and nor the health, physical health, la'asot ha'mitzvot, to follow the Torah, to live according to the mitzvot, kadesh tovelu mehayeh olam haba, and you will thus lose your entry card. You will lose your ticket to the next world. And you will thus have lost both worlds. As before you were able to gain both worlds, you will now lose both. When a person is in this world burdened with holy sickness, and war, and famine, in that situation, a person cannot spend his days in all those positive things that will lead him to Olam Haba. And for this very reason, Hit'awu Kol Israel, Nevi'ehem u'Hachmehem, Yimov HaMelech HaMashiach. It is for this reason that Am Yisrael, all the Chachamim, all the Nevi'im, yearned for Yimov HaMashiach, which is a time of success and plenty in this world, moderated by the Torah, so that a person does not sink into the quagmire of the material world, which is easily done. The reason that we wish for and hope for Yimov HaMashiach, the reason we hope for these things is Kadesh Yanuhu Mimalchut Harisha, so that we will be free of the influence of foreign and evil rulers and kingdoms. She'ena manahat lahem Yisrael la'asok b'Torah u'b'mitzvot kahopen. Because when we are under their thumb, then we are unable to live our lives in this world as we would wish, as we should. That is to say, to focus on the Torah and the mitzvot, because we won't have, again, the peace of mind, and we won't have the wherewithal to do that. And thus, in such a situation, the ideal situation, Yimot HaMashiach, in this world, we have margoa, which literally means peace and quiet, peace of mind. And we will be able to focus on the Chokhmah through the Torah. Kadeshi Yizku l'hayah ha'olam haba. And thus we will be zocheh, we will merit Olam Haba. Lefi, Rambam goes on to say, Halachat Toith, Lefi she'botham hayomim. At that time, Yimot HaMashiach, Tirbeh ha'de'ah wa'achokhmah wa'ha'emeth. There will be much wisdom and knowledge and truth. Shneimar ki mala'ah ha'aretz de'ah et Adonai. And there are many pesukim that speak about such a time. As it says here, the world will be replete with knowledge of Hashem. Wheneimar v'lo yelamudu od ishat re'ehu v'ishat ahiyu. They will not teach each other to do evil and to wage war. Wheneimar v'hasiroti et lev ha'even mibasarchem, and I will remove the heart of stone literally from you. Why? Mipaneh she'otho hamelech, that leader of the Jewish people at that time, she'ya'amod mizerat David, who will arise, will be a descendant of David HaMelech, will be from Mishpachat HaMelucha, from the royal blood. Ba'al Chokhmah yiyeh yoter mishalomo, will be wiser and greater in wisdom and understanding, greater than Shlomo HaMelech, who is referred to as Hechacham Mikol Adam, the wisest of all men. Unavi Gadolhu, and he will be a great prophet. Karov mi Moshe Rabbeinu. This is again an Arabic grammatical construction. Karov mi Moshe Rabbeinu means Karov le Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, he will be close to the level of Moshe Rabbeinu. So Rambam writes here in Hilchot Teshuvah. It should be noted that this is not what Rambam writes in Hilchot Velachim Umilhamot. There Rambam discusses how the Melech HaMashiach does not have to perform miracles. He does not mention that he will be a Navi, a prophet, in other words, on a very high, unique spiritual level. Rambam does write these things, as he writes here, in some of his letters, but apparently he changed his mind. And it's interesting to know that he did not correct or change or edit that which is written here, but that is the fact. So Rambam here describes the Melech HaMashiach as not just as a great political leader, but also as a great spiritual leader. And therefore, lefichach yilamed kol ha'am, he will teach, therefore, all of the people. V'yoreh otham derech Hashem, he will instruct them in the ways of Hashem, how to live in such a state of communion and true connection and meaningful communion with Hashem. V'yavol kol hagoyim l'shamua, and all the goyim, the nations of the earth, will also come to hear him because of his great wisdom and teaching. Shneimar v'haya ba'harit hayamim, will be at the end of days. Nachon yeh har beth Hashem b'rosh harim, and there it goes on to describe how they will come to hear. Let us look at that pasuk, perhaps. This is in Yeshayahu Perek Bet. Here it says, you should be able to see Perek Bet, pasuk Bet. V'haya b'harit hayamim, it shall be in the end of days. Nachon yeh har beth Adonai b'rosh harim. In other words, the Mikdash will be built b'rosh harim, on the hills of Yerushalayim. V'nisa migeva'oth. V'naharu elav kol hagoyim, and will be held in the greatest esteem, and all the goyim will come to hear. V'halechu amim rabim, many nations will come and learn. V'amaru lechu v'na'aleh el har Adonai el bet Elohei Yaakov. Let us go up to Yerushalayim and to the Mikdash. V'yorenu miderachau, and so he will teach us from his ways. In other words, here Rambam seems to be understanding the pasuk to be referring to the Melech HaMashiach. V'nelecha be'orechotho, and let us walk in his ways and adopt his ways. Kim l'Tzion teseh Torah udvar Adonai Yerushalayim, because the Torah will emanate from Zion and Yerushalayim. And then it goes on to say, v'shafat ben hagoyim, v'hochiach la'amim rabim, and he will also act as a kind of adjudicator and judge and
International Court of Justice.
Well, I'd rather not mention that body in this context, but something like that. And then people also and then people will wish to beat their swords into plowshares, etc. The famous pesukim, that there will be universal peace. Now this is, so in other words, the people who suggested that the United Nations and the International Court for this and the International Organization for that should try and achieve these things are not completely wrong. That is what we aspire to, and it is possible. But it is not possible without the Torah. It is not possible without Hashem. It is not possible without the teaching of Am Yisrael to the world. And none of this can be achieved without Yemot HaMashiach, Malchut Beth David, a true Torah state, a true Jewish state, not a Herzlian or Ben Gurion style state. That does not facilitate such things. Only then can the world hope for those things mentioned in that second chapter of Yeshayahu. So the idea was not a bad idea, but there was never any possibility of these things being realized in a world divorced from Hashem and bereft of any understanding that springs from the Torah. At any rate, here Rambam definitely describes the Melech HaMashiach as being a very great figure of historical international importance and stature, that people will recognize. He will be a great teacher and a prophet. Navi Gadol hu karov mi Moshe Rabbeinu, close to the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is a very, very unequivocal, unambiguous statement. And therefore, Yilamed kol ha'am yureh ofam derech Hashem uyavo kol hagoyim. So this is a very a wonderful, magnificent, sublime period of time. Note also that Rambam here says that this person, as he describes him here, this Melech HaMashiach can only be such one who is Mizera David. I'll explain in a moment why I mention this. Let us first finish this perek. וסוף השכר כולו והטובה האחרונה שאין לה הפסק ולא גירעון. הוא חיי העולם הבא. But the true ultimate reward, שאין לה הפסק ולא גירעון, that is everlasting and beyond compare, that is Olam Haba, not in this world. So Yemot HaMashiach is not the end game. It is a wonderful historical time, but it is not Sof HaSachar, it's not the ultimate reward and reality. Aval Yemot HaMashiach hu ha'olam hazeh. This world, the Olam of the Yemot HaMashiach is in this world. U'olam kaminaho holech. Here Rambam repeats what he says elsewhere, that Yemot HaMashiach, the world remains essentially in the same state that we find it today. In other words, the material and all the realities and aspects of reality in this world will not change. That is the meaning of, as Rambam now quotes, as was stated by the early Chachamim, that is to say, Rabbotanu Zal, Chachamei Mishneh wa Talmud, En ben ha'olam hazeh li'yemot HaMashiach ela she'ibud malchuyot bilevad. There is no difference, so states Shemuel and the Talmud and others, and Rambam adopts this position without any equivocation in all places. Olam hazeh and Yemot HaMashiach are the same place. Ela she'ibud malchuyot. That is the difference. In other words, Am Yisrael will be free, independent, sovereign, and will of course live according to the Torah and therefore succeed in every way. I think because of the time I wanted to point out something with regards to what Rambam writes in Hilchot Melachim or Milhamot about Malchuth and who can be a Melech, and whether he has to be from Zera David, as Rambam mentions here, but we'll perhaps discuss that next time. I will point out that I once heard a certain Hiloni, in some ways well-intentioned, but not very well schooled in Torah matters, shall we say. He's a historian, a wise man in historical matters. Not through no fault of his own, he was brought up on a very secular kibbutz. He's not anti-Torah, but he's totally non-Torah. He's not. I wouldn't describe him at all as an anti-Torah person. His name is Professor Udi Manor, Ehud Manor, and not to be mistaken with an Israeli musician or singer by the same name. And who I think also grew up on a kibbutz, but I don't think the same kibbutz. So I heard him once say in a lecture, he quoted this statement, Ben Olam Hazeh Yimot HaMashiach Shibud Malchut Bilvad. He understood it in a universal sense. In other words, all nations will be independent and free of other nations. In other words, no nation will try and control any other nation. Somehow he viewed this in a universalist light. But that's not what Chazal meant. It's not what Rambam means here either, clearly. Rambam is referring to Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael will be independent and sovereign and not be subjugated and influenced by others. Shibud Malchut refers to all the other nations and powers vis-a-vis Am Yisrael. That Am Yisrael will be without Shibud Malchut. It doesn't just tell us exactly what will be between all nations, etc., how they will conduct their affairs. That apparently, according to what Rambam wrote here, will be adjudicated by, and they will be instructed by Melech Mashiach how to get on with each other, and rather than massacre each other. But this just shows you how people unschooled and far distant and removed from the Torah, how readily and easily they misunderstand many statements and ideas in the Torah. Sometimes they don't even quote them correctly, but even if they do, they misinterpret them. So no one should make that mistake. We shall end here, therefore, for today. Heyu beruchim. May Hashem direct us, Yanhenu b'derech emet, along the path of truth, of Torah. Hizku v'yames levavchem, kol hamiyahalim l'Adonai. Shalom, shalom, v'nisahon. Kol tov.